Okay, so before we go into a lot of detail about bond valuation and stock valuation techniques, um, I want to spend some time talking about sort of where stock and bonds come from, how they're initially sort of created in the world, and in order to get our heads around that, we need to understand what it means for a company to raise money. So if you remember to, a balance sheet, right, you've got assets and liabilities and stockholders' equity. And within the equity account, there's capital stock, retained earnings, various different flavors of stock, which actually we're not going to get into a lot of detail about. But how do companies pay for the assets that they require, and how they pay for the assets that they require change over the life of a company? Because that's kind of important to at least understand at a basic level. So businesses go through a life cycle just like people do, right? Business starts up. So some of you may want to start your own business someday. And then depending on what kind of a business you plan to start, you can either kind of stay in just a steady state. If you wanted to start up a small, you know, CPA firm, you don't need to grow. You can just sort of be a one person shop. Um, but many businesses start up with the intention of growing into a significant business. Perhaps not huge, not every company is going to become the next General Electric, but every company started somewhere, and even these good-sized ones, the local, CNS wholesale grocers, etc., they started somewhere and they grew to get to be the mature businesses that they are. And then, as industries change and as the world changes around them, businesses can go into decline and eventually close. But we're going to focus on the sort of first three phases of a business's lifestyle, the cycle. I don't know why I keep saying lifestyle instead of life cycle. The startup, growth, and maturity phase. I was involved in financing for startup businesses and small growing businesses for a number of years, and this material in this chapter is quite accurate, actually. Um, it's unfortunate. I mean, I can't tell you how many businesses I had to tell, no, if you're starting out, you can't get venture capital. Basically, for startups, where do they get their money? They get them from personal loans from family and friends. They save up their own personal funding to start the business, and then more often than not, they have to borrow money from a bank. And in order to borrow money from the bank, they have to put up their own assets as collateral. It's considered a very, very risky thing to loan money to a startup, and banks won't do it. They won't, unless they know they can get their money back. And so, if you're ever thinking about starting a business, realize that you're going to put everything you own on the line to do it. And many people do every single day. And they succeed sometimes they fail. So that's where startup businesses get their money. Now, there is the Small Business Administration is a government agency. They are who I worked for through the Small Business Development Center. We have one here in Keene, actually, as well. And they provide technical support to small businesses, which is very broad definition. And one of the things that they do, in addition to providing technical support through business consultants such as myself, is that they guarantee loans to small businesses. And what that means, a loan guarantee, right? The SBA does not usually provide direct loans to businesses. What they do is just like your student loans. You've got some guaranteed student loans probably. And what that means is if you default on your loan, the government is going to pay the bank. So it's a way for a bank to make a loan without taking on all of the risk. So these SBA loans basically provide the security that the banks need in order to feel comfortable making the loans. So then we move to angel investing and venture capital. And your textbook kind of oversimplifies things. And to be honest with you, going into a lot of detail is beyond the scope of this introductory finance class. If any of you are interested in learning more, just hit me up. I do know a fair amount about this process, and I've worked with angel investors myself in the past. This is the website of the Angel Investor Forum in Connecticut. And basically, if an entrepreneur has an idea, you can pitch it to these investors, and if they're interested, they'll look a little closer, and they provide loans, but those loans are intended to turn into equity positions afterwards. Remember, a loan is a liability, and equity is stock, right? Or stock is an equity, I guess we could say. And so they generally provide early stage financing in the form of what's called convertible loans. And angel investors are not the same as venture financing. Venture financing usually comes along later in the life cycle of a company. Venture capital firms are firms. You'll see that angel investors over here, this is just sort of a collaborative group of individual investors. Venture capital firms are generally, not always, but generally, more organized into firms. They're looking for companies that have a track record already. Angel investors will come in earlier. So that's early stage financing. And you'll notice that there is no discussion of stocks and bonds yet, right? For startups, they're certainly not issuing bonds. They can issue stock. So what that looks like, if you're starting up and you want to borrow, $5,000 from your uncle and give him a piece of the company, right? What you've essentially done is issue stock. I mean, it's not necessarily always going to be formal in that way. But if your company does grow, you've got to come back and deal with that, ownership sharing that you've generated earlier in the life cycle of the company. Once a company, though, is a little bit bigger, that's when we can start getting into issuing stocks and bonds. And I think I'm going to stop it here and make a new video